The Zodiac Killer, Charles Manson, the Golden State Killer.
And the Doodler?
In the 1970s, a serial killer preyed on gay men in San Francisco. It was underreported, and he was never caught.
Will a renewed search finally track him down?
We're previewing The Doodler.
That's on this episode of So Much Crime.
So Little Time.
Before we jump into today's episode, don't forget that we've got a Patreon, patreon.com/so much crime, so little time. Join us there for some early release episodes, bonus content, my favorite, which is the outtakes, which you get to hear exactly how I really feel about most of what Jeff says. And also you get to support our show, which is just going to give you the warm and fuzzies inside. Thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate it. And I hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Welcome to So Much Crime, So Little Time. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Dee. And in this episode, we'll introduce you to The Doodler, a podcast from the San Francisco Chronicle and The Binge.
If you haven't listened to The Doodler, that is great. This is one of our preview episodes.
We're only going to introduce you to the podcast and cover parts of the very first episode. There will be no spoilers for what's to come.
You'll also find a link to The Doodler in our show notes.
In our next episode, we'll discuss the whole series, but right now we just want to decide if this is a crime that's worth your time. But buckle up. First of all, we're heading to January 27, 1974 for the time machine.
All right, Dee, let's get ourselves in the mindset of 1974. A couple fun facts. We're talking about January 27th, 1974, and in pop culture, American history, that same month, January 15th, 1974, was when the show Happy Days debuted.
Monday, Tuesday, Happy Days.
Yeah.
The Fonz.
Yeah, that's it.
The Fonz. Yes,
yeah,
indeed.
the Fonz. Henry
That made
Winkler.
it all the way to Ireland.
Ron Howard. Great show. And January 16th, the next day, the novel Jaws by Peter Benchley came out.
Stop it. That's gas.
Okay, I have a song for you that I think is crazy easy, but you tell me. I only have 3 lines. So this is the number 1 song in America in January of 1974. And it begins. Memories.
At the corner of my mind.
Yeah, you got it off one word. One word. Do you know the name of the song? Like the corners of my mind.
Twisted.
Misty watercolored memories of
Thoughts I'd left behind?
the way we were.
No.
That's the name of the song, The Way We Were. Do you know who sings it?
No.
Barbara Streisand.
Oh. There you go.
Yeah. It was also the name of a movie that she starred in with Robert Redford that came out the year before, in 1973. A romantic drama directed by Sidney Pollack. All right, what you got for me?
I'm going to give you an option. Do you want to know names of movies and be able to put them beside some quotes? Or do you want me to give a quote and you have to try and guess the movie at the time?
I think we should do the first one where I know the movies and I have to figure out which quote goes to what.
Okay. We've got Blazing Saddles. We've got The Towering Inferno.
Okay.
Based in
Yeah.
San Francisco. And the last one is The Godfather Part 2.
Sure. Yep.
I'm going to read the review, like the name of the review. And I'm going to read 2 lines from a review. And you have to try and map it to a movie. You ready?
Yep.
Sheriff murdered, people stampeded and cattle raped. Quality. Many people who love this film may feel that the negative comments from others are inoffensive, as this is such a funny film. I will say this. They are entitled to their opinions, even if they are wrong. This is one of the best comedies ever made.
That's Blazing Saddles. Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding.
Have you seen Blazing Saddles?
Yep. No.
Oh.
But apparently they rape cows, and I don't know if I want to see that.
I actually don't remember that from this movie. This movie has some of the all-time great, funny scenes and performances. Gene Wilder is fantastic in it.
I'll add it to my list.
Okay. Some of it has not aged well, but
Have you seen Father Ted? Insert movie name. Had mostly A-list stars. They didn't elevate the material, but I'm sure they all got nice paychecks.
oh, is that Towering Inferno?
Mm-hmm.
I have not seen this movie, but
Who's in it?
uh,
Oh, okay.
a lot of famous people. I know of it. I've just never seen it. I'm good at this game.
You are. This is like we're playing to your strengths here. Okay.
You got my song on the first word.
I mean, yeah. Overambitious, overlong, and overrated.
Godfather 2.
Yeah. Is that just because it was the last one?
No, that was Godfather 3. That was all those things. Godfather 2.
No. The last one isn't. Did you get that so quick because it was the last one on my list?
No. Is that yeah, no. That's a reasonable description of Godfather 2. I disagree, but it's a reasonable description.
Indeed.
Is that it?
Anyway, there you go.
All right.
That's all I have.
All right, and that was our time machine today. All right, let's jump into this podcast. Dee, what is this podcast all about?
So this podcast was released in 2021. The host is Kevin Fagan, a veteran San Francisco Chronicle reporter. It's about 8 episodes long. I'm going to put a disclaimer in here that the first episode is free on Spotify, but for the rest of the series, you have to pay a fee of $4.99, so just shy of $5 to listen to the other 7 episodes. We can come back at the end of this and let you know whether we think it's worth your $5. Maybe that'll be our metric now as opposed to your time, Jeff. Length is about 20 to 30 minutes per episode. But what is the story, Jeff? Can you give us an overview of what we are covering here?
All right, yeah. So this story begins in 1974. We hear a man who called the police to report a body on Ocean Beach in San Francisco. The victim was a guy named Gerald Kavanaugh. He was found stabbed 17 times. And then we learn about the serial killer who was responsible for this crime. So he was a guy who would meet men in bars. He would draw their pictures, which is where the name The Doodler comes from. And then they would end up getting murdered. This was happening at the same time that the Zodiac Killer was very much in the news in San Francisco, in the Bay Area. And also a time where, honestly, there were a lot of other random killers happening. And so this case seemed to get buried in the news, whether it was because there was just more high-profile things going on or it was because the victims were gay men. I think we're going to hear more about that. But so this was 1974, and now 50 years later, there is an investigator named Dan Cunningham who is trying to solve this cold case. So also we want to note that so as we're recording this in February of 2025, there is currently a one-man show that is being put on at the Theater Rhinoceros, which is also known as the Rhino in San Francisco. And that is the oldest LGBTQ plus theater in America. And so we're going to have a special interview with Chris Mancini, who is a board member from the Rhino. And that's going to be a special release that's going to come out concurrently with our full recap. And in that interview, we'll discuss the case, the play, and kind of surrounding issues. So that's something to look forward to. All right, Dee, let's jump into our discussion of episode 1 of The Doodler. Where would you like to begin? We could talk about the opening, the host, the story.
I mean, where to begin? I'm going to begin at a random point that I want to bring up about the host. Talk about like a method actor. He said he lived on the streets of San Francisco for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty gnarly.
So that's Kevin Fagan. He has been a longtime reporter with the San Francisco Chronicle. He has he gives his credits at the beginning just about some of the things that he's done over his career.
I was wondering if you would hate that. I felt like as he was doing that, I was like, Jeff is going to mention that he hates this.
I thought about hating it, and I decided I liked it. And the reason I did was because I think there's been a couple of times where we've talked about we don't know who this host is and what their credentials are, and if they're a journalist, if they're just somebody who's interested in this case, if they're somehow connected to the case. And you get the whole gamut on these podcasts. So I appreciated it. I think, yeah, it was a little showy. It was a little bit kind of bragging about the things he'd done, but yeah, he actually has a book out on.
Can I pause for a second?
Okay, sure.
It's been a while since I brought this up, but I just want to say, like, the bragging about things we've done, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I will say, I know I can see you sighing. Marathons and English majors are really interesting and really impressive. Like, go you, well done. But like, of course you're going to bring them up if it makes sense. Like, I've run a marathon there. Oh, you're talking about a place. I've run a marathon there. Like, he is introducing a podcast about a serial killer. He's going to say, hey, by the way, I am legit. There is so many podcasts out there that think that they know everything about like how to investigate these, and I'm telling you I am legitimate. Why do you feel that it's like not okay for him to say that?
Oh no, I liked it. I said I liked it.
No, you said you wanted to hate it.
Yeah, and then I realized that was dumb. And as I've matured and learned and grown as a person,
The last few months.
because I also like that fact you said about how he lived on the streets of San Francisco as part of his research piqued my interest. And so I Googled it, and he has a book out actually called, so he reported on this for the Chronicle. And so he lived on the San Francisco streets. This was in 2003. He spent 6 months living on the streets in San Francisco. Then it was working on this series for the Chronicle called Shame of the City, talking about what was then the exploding crisis of homelessness and possible solutions. He more recently has a book out called The Lost and the Found, a true story of homelessness, found family, and second chances. Yeah, I don't know. I am trying to learn and improve as a person.
That's all we can ever ask for. We recently read a book about, it's called The Last Call. The author, by the way, is Elon Green. We can put a link in the show notes. I think we've mentioned The Last Call on this show before, Jeff.
I think it's a while ago, but yeah, I think you're right.
So Last Call is a book. It's a book basically about a serial killer, but in New York in the 1990s. And I don't know, I feel like I felt a lot of similarities going on here. Quite often in The Last Call, the killer was picking men up in gay bars. He seemed to be leaning into the fact that gay men weren't like, they had their safe haven in like certain areas and certain bars, but in other areas they wouldn't, and they would have felt vulnerable. And it felt like there was a lot of comparisons, a lot of connections here. The sketch in particular, how he used to sketch the men and then hand it to them, and kind of that was his like, I'm so into you. That was his line as such. Felt very similar, because in The Last Call, it was always like targeting a vulnerable person who is feeling safe in the safe haven, the gay bar that they know and they're comfortable in, etc. Did you think of that book at all during this?
I definitely did. And I think, I don't know, it's interesting to hear this story. So this story set in 1974. That book was, like you said, in the 90s. So this was an earlier time, and a time where I feel like, even though we're talking about San Francisco, I think it was also interesting to hear. This is one of the things I liked about the host, was I feel like he contextualized the time and the place, and how this was a place that gay men came to because they felt like it was maybe safer, or there was more sense of community than the places they came from elsewhere in the US, or in the world. But like, this still wasn't a safe place, and it still wasn't a place where you could be totally open out in society, and you were still victimized, and you were still harassed, and you were still arrested, and it was still a crime. And so you still had to sort of live a little bit a secreted life. And I thought that was described effectively here. In a way, it was sort of sad to think about how that Last Call was describing a lot of the same issues of, here are people who are sneaking around a little bit and be very covert about who they are, for fear of what might happen to them. And then that was, 20 years after this, and it didn't, in some ways they were still a very vulnerable population to a serial killer in this way, in a way that other populations, other demographics wouldn't be. So yeah, but I definitely thought of that book for sure.
I think as well it goes back to the how things are being overlooked by the police. Like at one point it was said this murder that we're discussing, like that is being discussed in episode 1, was buried in the
Yeah.
newspaper. It's not like it was like front and center, a body been found on a beach. And I can't imagine kind of level of people not even giving a shit, like regardless of your lifestyle.
Yeah, I feel like a parallel with what our host has reported on before is the unhoused population, like people who are living on the streets.
Yeah.
And these are people who I feel like there's always more legislation about this to basically force people off the streets, but these are folks who have nowhere to go, and people don't. I feel like people.
But aren't they making it illegal? They're trying to make it illegal in Oakland.
Yeah, and I mean it happens in San Jose. It happens in cities around the country, but I mean I think the inhumanity of some of those laws of we just want these people to not be here. We don't want to help them.
NIMBYism.
Yeah, we don't want to provide housing. We don't want to provide, any type of support services. And I feel like it's a similar thing of these people don't count as people to us. That's why they aren't on the front page. That's why it isn't something that people talk about and pay attention to. And these crimes sometimes go unsolved. It's got to be a downer for Kevin Fagan to be constantly reporting on these kinds of stories, but I know that's like his thing.
Yeah, it would be interesting to talk to him and see about that aspect. I think that's a really good point. Like it's heavy shit, like constant heavy shit that he's looking into. And I don't know, maybe what's his impetus? What's his driver? Like, is it that he's helping people and he's hoping to shed a light on situations that people are misunderstanding?
I don't know. I think that's exactly it. And that relates also to the other person I want to talk about, which is Dan Cunningham. So Dan Cunningham is the investigator who's working this cold case now in the present day. And I feel like he, similar to other cold case detectives, I mean, going all the way back to Matt Hutchison, who we talked about from the Sunnyvale, California police force.
We love you, Matt.
Yeah. One of the things I really liked about the way he kind of came across in this first episode is he seemed to be showing respect for the man, Joe Kavanaugh, who was found murdered on Ocean Beach, and talking about how he was a guy who's trying to be himself, like trying to live his life as who he was, and he got murdered as a consequence of that, and how sort of unjust that was. And I think it displayed a lot of like empathy and human understanding, so I feel like this is, to be a cold case detective, you have to really see the humanity in these people who died so long ago, and see them as people, and just have that sort of that feeling of humanity for them, which kind of keeps you going. I presume that's sort of what propels him. And I thought that came across really effectively here.
I think you're right. And I think you're right. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this all plays out. Like, because at the end of the day, we're still looking at a cold case. And I don't know. I just think, do you think it's easier to look back on an investigation in that kind of way when you've got hindsight in there, as opposed to at the time?
Easier for the investigator?
Yeah.
No.
Not easier to solve. I mean, it feels a little bit like there's less to lose because people aren't expecting you to solve it.
Oh, yeah, I guess that's true. I sometimes think of these cold case detectives as like archaeologists. I was always sort of fascinated by archaeologists as a kid, and I always thought it was amazing how they draw these conclusions.
That tracks so much.
What?
Sorry. It just does.
Indiana Jones. It's all Indiana Jones.
Indeed. Mm-hmm.
But okay, and that's a bad example of what I'm about to talk about. Or like paleontologists, or like Jurassic Park, right? Like people who can look.
Ross from Friends.
Or I was thinking of Dr. Alan Grant from Jurassic Park, but people who can look at like so little data and so little evidence in something so old and be able to sort of paint a picture of what was going on. And I mean, you have so little to work with that it's it seems like an impossible task. You know, in this case, this is a 50-year-old case. So there's people who may have had relevant information, people who may have been witness to something who are long dead, long gone, or their memories have faded so much that, like, what do you have to work with? Like, it seems so thin. And I mean, some of the other cases we've talked about in the past have been solved through DNA evidence. And sometimes it seems almost like through luck, like through happenstance. If this is a person who happened to be in the prison system, so we happen to have their fingerprints or you know, a DNA sample. But I don't know, these cases just seem so impossible that I hear what you're saying though. I mean, you're removed from the immediacy of the emotion of it. But I don't, yeah, how these detectives, how these investigators find the sort of the energy to tackle this. I don't know. I don't have.
I think I would find it infuriating because I really like solving puzzles, and I really like solving puzzles, and I don't think I'd be able to like cope with the odds are stacked against you.
Yeah.
And like even when we do hear about one being solved, like for everyone solved, there's so many unsolved. So yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Come here. I want to know your thoughts on the phone call.
That opens it up.
The
Yeah. What about it?
Why would someone who found a body or thinks they found a body not want to leave their name?
Oh, I presumed it was because they were also a gay man who, I mean, this is a spot on the beach where people would go to have sex.
Yeah, but he's calling in like the next day, no?
No, I think it was that night.
Oh.
I think. I don't know that we know that. I don't know that that's clear, but that was my presumption, was that he was someone who was a part of this community on this scene and didn't want to be identified.
Okay.
Well, so this was at Ocean Beach and like Balboa Street, which when I lived in San Francisco, Ocean Beach was the beach that we would take our kids to. Like, I spent a lot of time on Ocean Beach, and I mean, it's a big beach. It's the whole kind of west side on the Sunset District of San Francisco, at the edge of Golden Gate Park. It's one of those beaches where it's a factor of sort of the where it is in the city, and it's right on the edge of the Pacific Ocean, and it's the neighborhood that is like the foggiest neighborhood and the kind of the coldest neighborhood, and it just kind of like there's a weight, like a sort of a psychic weight at that beach of like, this place has seen some things, but I had no idea that it'd seen stuff like this. Like, I guess, you know, sure, like in a city that you're gonna get crimes and murders and things that happen in all different kinds of places, but that sort of hit me when I first heard that opening of, oh shoot, I've been there. Like, I've took my kids there when they were babies. But yeah, it's a place I know well, which was sort of startling.
It kind of hits different.
Yeah.
I get that.
Similar to the case we talked about with Matt Hutchinson, the Karen Stitt case, where, I mean, that happened at a right by a mini golf course that I've also taken my kids to a bunch of times.
Yeah, it's kind of jarring when you're like, oh, this isn't like far away. This is like, this is here. This is right beside me, or right beside where I've been. And I think especially when you've brought your kids to anywhere as well. That makes sense.
Yeah. All right, Dee, how eager are you to keep listening?
If we hadn't decided that we were going to listen to this, it was just me and we weren't recording, I'm not necessarily sure if I would pay $5 to listen to the rest of it.
What if it was free? Would you keep going if it was free?
If it was free, it'd be like local-ish story to where we are. Like, host is really knowledgeable and like I'm kind of trusting him on this journey. And also I think, as I said, like our connection to like last call, I think it's going to be a devastatingly informative podcast to listen to. And I would want to keep listening to it. But
you're sort of balking at the principle of the subscription thing, which we've never done one before. I don't think we've covered one before that is behind a paywall like this. And we've certainly talked about covering some, and then we saw that it was behind a paywall and we said, nope, like we want to focus on ones that are freely available.
As people who are producing podcasts, but not investigative podcasts, which like two very different things in terms of like level of effort to put out a show. I feel bad that I'm balking at that, but I'm a little bit like, well, like I pay my Spotify subscription. Like I feel like There's too many subscriptions coming out of me.
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that make me real stingy?
No, I mean
Maybe.
we're all sort of dying a slow death by monthly subscription fees.
Oh,
So
yeah. Amongst the rest of the shite that's happening. What about you? Are you eager to keep listening?
I am in terms of the story. I think this is not a type of story. We've covered serial killers before, but not one like this. It's it's local to us story. I think there's an interesting angle of how this was a 50-year-old cold case that has sort of been reopened recently and had some new attention on it. So all of that is interesting. I think that's a separate thing. I definitely see it as a separate issue of like, should you have to pay $4.99 a month to get access to this? And I do balk at that business model for this because I also pay for Spotify and a lot of other subscription services. And what an interesting thing is one of the other podcasts that we talked about on our show, Dr. Miracle, is available through the same service, the Binge. So you can pay that $4.99 a month and you can listen to a bunch of different shows, including that one. But when we listened to that one, it was still free. And I think this one was originally free. I think this one later on, after its publication at some point, went behind this paywall, which other shows do.
Maybe they'll get us behind the paywall.
Sure.
Or maybe they'll keep us outside the paywall, but they'll be like, we'll start paying you to start talking about the podcasts that are behind the paywall.
Anyone is willing to contact us. Our email is in the show notes. And if you want to give us money to do this, we will.
Give us money.
We will
give us money.
Anyway, but no, I am interested in terms of the story. I'm interested to hear more. Like we said, we're going to talk about this play that is going on and just learn a little bit more about this story and the context of it. So let's keep listening and find out. Before we go, if you enjoyed this episode and you don't want to put us behind your paywall, which we don't really want to do that, but help us reach more people. So leave a comment on the episode, give us a rating on Apple or Spotify, 5 stars, please, and tell a friend. Tell everyone you know, send out the link, let them know. So much crime, so little time. Get the word out. We appreciate it. Next time, what will we learn about the Doodler's other victims?
And how did the serial killer remain on the loose for 50 years and counting?
We'll also have a special interview episode on a unique play about the case.
That's on the next So Much Crime.
So Little Time.
So Much Crime, So Little Time is a production of MimeGov Media. The executive producer is Paxton Calariso. Our associate producer is Blythe Ty. Theme music was composed by Vyacheslav Starostin. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to this show in your podcast app. Don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and a review. Even better, tell your friends. To join the discussion, look for us on social media. Check out the show notes for all the links. Thanks for listening.